The envelope was thin. That's the first thing I noticed, how thin it was. As if the landlord hadn't needed many words to dismantle everything I had built in Chicago over the past 3 years. I remember reading the first line standing in the hallway outside my apartment, still in my work clothes from a Friday that had lasted 14 hours, my heels in one hand and the paper in the other, the fluorescent light above me buzzing with that particular indifference that cheap hallways always have. Notice of pending eviction. You have 34 days to vacate the premises or settle the outstanding balance in full. I slid down the wall right there in the corridor. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. I had already cried every night for 2 weeks, ever since Derek left. And I think something inside me had simply run out of tears the way a pen runs out of ink, not broken, just empty. The crying had been replaced by a kind of hollow alertness, a constant low-level attention to all the ways things could still get worse. And here was one of them. Thin paper. 34 days. I had come to Chicago from a small town outside of Nashville, Tennessee, 3 years earlier, with 2 suitcases, $400, and the kind of hope that embarrasses you later, the bright, uninformed kind, the kind that hasn't been tested yet, and so still believes in itself completely. I was 21. I thought cities were generous to people who worked hard, and for a while, maybe Chicago was. I found a job within 3 weeks of arriving. Not a glamorous one, not well paid, but real, a position as an administrative assistant at Chen Architecture Group, one of the most respected firms in the Loop, housed on the 14th floor of a glass building that looked from the outside like the kind of place where important things happened. The salary was not important. But it was a start, and I told myself, starts were enough. What I didn't know, when I signed the offer letter with a hand that was shaking slightly with relief, was that a job has more than a salary, it has a climate. And the climate at Chen Architecture Group was determined, almost entirely, by one person. Maya Chen. Even her name felt architectural, precise, load-bearing. I want you to understand something about Maya before I tell you what happened between us. What happened to both of us. Because I think it matters, because the version of her that I met on my first day was not the real one. It was the armor she wore so well, had worn for so long, that even she had forgotten what was underneath it. And I think part of what happened between us was simply this. I was too inexperienced, too new, too unaware of the rules to stay at the proper distance. I walked too close without knowing I was doing it. And once you're close enough to someone, the armor stops working. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Maya Chen was 42 years old when I started working for her, and she moved through the office with the particular authority of someone who had never needed anyone's permission for anything. Tailored blazers and charcoal and navy, always. Hair pulled back with a severity that felt deliberate, almost punishing, as though beauty were something she had decided to deprioritize along with sentiment and idle conversation. She was not unkind in any obvious way. She never shouted, never made personal remarks, never singled anyone out for humiliation in the way that certain powerful people do when they've confused cruelty with leadership. She was simply impenetrable. A single look from Maya Chen could silence a room the way dropping a heavy book silences a library. Sudden, complete, and followed by a moment in which everyone pretends nothing happened. On my second day of work, she called me into her office because I had formatted a client presentation in the wrong font. "Do you know why we use Helvetica, Miss Harris?" she asked without looking up from her desk. No, I'm sorry, because it doesn't demand attention. It earns it. This, she slid the folder across the desk with the tips of 2 fingers, demands nothing. It begs. Do you understand the difference? Yes, I said. I'll redo it. I know you'll redo it, she said. The question is whether you understand why. I took the folder. I walked back to my desk. I redid the entire presentation in 40 minutes, checked the font 3 times, and brought it back. She was on the phone when I placed it on her desk. She didn't acknowledge me. I went back to my station and sat down and told myself, this is normal. This is just how things work at the professional level. This is what you wanted. You wanted to work somewhere that mattered. This was my life for the next 3 years. Making myself smaller in measured, strategic ways. Getting things right on the second try, sometimes the first. Learning the architecture of Maya Chen's silences, Which ones meant quiet disappointment? Which ones meant she was solving a problem in her head and had temporarily forgotten you existed? And which ones, rare as they were, meant something closer to approval? Those last ones I hoarded. They kept me going longer than I cared to admit. The other assistants on the floor called her the muralha, the wall, because one of the Brazilian interns had coined the term during her first week, and it had spread with the particular enthusiasm of a word that is exactly right. They said it with a combination of exasperation and affection, the way you name something you have stopped trying to fully understand and have made peace with instead. I never used that name. I'm not sure why in those early years. Maybe because I had grown up in a house where the adults wore their pain on the outside, and I had learned early to look for what was underneath a person's surface presentation. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe I just always suspected that walls, by their nature, imply a door somewhere. Derek left on a Tuesday in October, which in Chicago means the city had already started making its annual threat. The temperature dropping, the lake going gray and serious, the light coming in at angles that made everything look more serious than it was. He didn't argue. He didn't even seem particularly sad, which was almost worse than anger would have been. He packed with the efficient speed of someone who had been planning this for a while, maybe a long while, and when I stood in the bedroom doorway and asked him why, just give me that, he paused with a stack of folded shirts in his arms and looked at me in a way I can only describe as resigned. "I just don't think you're who I thought you were," he said, and then he left. I have spent a long time with those words, turning them over, looking at them from different angles. Because at first they sounded like a criticism, like I had somehow misrepresented myself, failed to be the person he had signed up for. And I carried that as guilt for weeks. But later, much later, I began to understand that he might have been telling a simpler truth, that he had wanted someone who would shrink comfortably into the shape of the life he was building. And I hadn't done that, not quite. And neither of us had known it until the space between us had grown too wide to cross on our own. I don't blame him anymore. I don't think he was a bad person. I think we were wrong for each other in a way that neither of us had the language for at the time. But what I understood immediately and concretely was the math. His name was on the lease. His income covered 60% of the rent every month, a detail that had seemed manageable when we were together, and now felt like a structural failure I should have noticed long before the building started shaking. Without his contribution, I had 34 days and a salary that covered just over half of what was owed. I called my mother in Tennessee. She cried and told me to come home. That Chicago had never been a good idea, that she had always said so. And something in me, some stubborn, exhausted, possibly foolish piece of me, said, "No, not home. Not yet. This city was supposed to be mine. This life was supposed to be mine." I hadn't finished figuring out what that meant yet. So I was sitting on the floor of a hallway on a Friday evening, holding an eviction notice and a pair of heels, when my phone buzzed on the linoleum beside me. A work email. Of course. "Miss Harris, the Lawson portfolio files are missing from the shared drive. I need them accessible by Sunday morning for the client call. Please locate and reorganize them before end of day tomorrow. Monsieur Chen." I stared at the email for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop, right there on the hallway floor, and started looking for the Lawson files. Because that's what I always did, because the job, at least, was something I could still control. If you're listening to this right now, I want to take a second to just be here with you. Because I know some of you have had a version of this moment, sitting on the floor somewhere, holding something that tells you the life you built has cracks you didn't see coming. Maybe it was a relationship, maybe it was a job, maybe it was something you'd worked toward for years that simply didn't work out the way you planned. And if that's where you are, or where you've been, I see you. I was there too, and I want you to know that what came next, for me, was nothing I could have predicted or planned. The most important things rarely are. If this story is already touching something in you, leave a like. It helps this channel more than you know. And if you're new here, subscribe, because this is the kind of story we tell here, and there are so many more coming. The following Thursday, I stayed late at the office. Not because Maya had asked me to. She hadn't addressed me directly in 2 days, which existed somewhere on the spectrum between punishment and indifference, and I had lost the ability to tell the difference. I stayed because I didn't want to go home. The apartment without Derek was a specific kind of awful, the kind that ambushes you in small moments. His hook by the door with nothing on it. The extra half of the closet now bare and somehow accusatory. The way the quiet at night was a different quality of quiet than it had been before. So I stayed. I reorganized the Lawson files into a new system. I updated the client contact database. I made a pot of coffee that I was too tired to actually drink. By 7:30, the office was empty except for me, and I was considering whether it was reasonable to sleep in the conference room rather than go home, which tells you something about the state of my mental health that week. I heard footsteps stop near my desk. I looked up. Maya was standing a few feet away, coat over one arm, keys in her hand. She was looking at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not the professional assessment, not the administrative disappointment. Something quieter, something that was trying, I thought, not to be concerned. "You look terrible," she said. I almost laughed. The surprise of it was physical. "Thank you. I'm not being cruel. I'm being accurate. There's a difference." She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was deciding whether to pursue something. "What's happening?" I don't know why I told her. I have asked myself this many times, and I still don't have a clean answer. Maybe because it was 7:30 on a Thursday and my reserves were gone. Maybe because she asked in a register I hadn't heard from her before, not warmth exactly, but attention. Or maybe it was simpler. Sometimes we tell the truth to the people we least expect to tell it to, because we have no performance prepared for them. I told her about Derek, about the eviction notice, about the 34 days, which by then had become 28. She listened without interrupting. No expression of sympathy, no small noises of consolation. She just listened, in the particular focused way that good architects listen to a brief, absorbing structure, looking for the essential problem. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How much do you make?" she asked. That's not. I know what you make. I said it. I'm asking whether you know. I told her my salary. She asked about my rent. I told her that too, and the number of the outstanding balance, and the math that didn't add up no matter which way I arranged it. She nodded slowly. A structural assessment. "I have 3 bedrooms," she said finally. "I use 1. The other 2 are storage and accumulated silence." A pause. "You could use 1, just for a while, until you stabilize your situation." I stared at her. "Ms. Chen, I'm not doing it for you," she said, already putting her coat on. "My housekeeper has been telling me for a year that the apartment is too empty, and it's affecting her motivation. This would resolve that particular conversation." She looked at me once more, in the neutral way she looked at things she had already decided about. "Think about it. Don't think too long." She walked to the elevator. The doors opened. She stepped in. They closed. And I sat there in the empty office for a long time, staring at the space where she had been standing, trying to understand what had just happened and whether I was going to say yes. I said yes 10 days later, having considered and reconsidered approximately 800 times. Her apartment was on the 23rd floor of a building on Lake Shore Drive, one of those addresses that in Chicago carries its own kind of weather, high above the ordinary altitude of regular life. Glass walls facing the lake, floors so pale and clean they reflected the ceiling, a kitchen that had the energy of a room where someone drinks coffee and that's it, and maybe occasionally assembles something from a deli container. A living room with one very good couch, and a wall of architectural books arranged not alphabetically, but by color, which was the first thing she did that surprised me enough to make me revise my assumptions about her. My room faced east. It was larger than my old bedroom, which I was trying not to feel embarrassed about. There was a small desk by the window, and a lamp that gave excellent reading light, and a wardrobe that smelled faintly of cedar. I found out later, from Curtis the building concierge, a warm Jamaican man in his 60s, who seemed to know the interior lives of everyone who lived there, and shared this knowledge like a person who has been entrusted with gifts he feels no obligation to hoard, that the room had once been a child's bedroom. A daughter, from a marriage that had ended a long time ago. Ms. Chen was different before, Curtis told me one morning in the elevator, in the confiding way of someone sharing a public secret. Warmer, She still cared about people being comfortable around her back then. The divorce took something out of her, not broke her, she's too strong for broke, but sealed something. Like a room you stop going into. I thought about that a lot in the early weeks. I thought about what it costs a person to seal themselves, and how long it takes for the seal to become just the way you are, indistinguishable from your actual personality. Living with Maya Chen was like being a guest in a building where you didn't yet have the complete floor plan. There were rules. Of course there were rules. She was Maya Chen. She ran a firm of 40 people with the organizational precision of someone who genuinely believed that entropy was a personal failure. No music before 7 in the morning. Dishes done immediately after use, not soaking, not in a while, immediately. The thermostat at 68 degrees, which in a Lakeshore Drive apartment in Chicago winter, is either a philosophy or a punishment, depending on whether you're from Tennessee. She had a cleaning schedule printed, laminated, and affixed to the inside of the kitchen cabinet. And the first time I found it, I held it up and looked at her with what I hoped was a neutrally questioning expression. And she looked back at me over her coffee with an expression that said, yes. And I was careful with her. She was careful with me. We were like two people sharing a space that neither of us had quite admitted yet was more than temporary. But then, in the way that seasons in Chicago change, not gradually and gently, but in accumulated moments you can't quite date, things shifted. It started with the tea. The third week, I came into the kitchen one morning at 6:57, which was 3 minutes before the no music rule expired, and therefore required a kind of reverent silence I found vaguely theatrical, and there was a mug on the counter already steaming. English breakfast. Milk. No sugar, the way I made it for myself, not the way she drank hers, which was green and took exactly 4 minutes and involved a small timer she kept beside the kettle. She was at the table with her newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, folded into precise quarters, and did not look up. I was making mine anyway, she said. 2 cups takes no longer than 1. I wrapped both hands around the mug, said nothing. But something in my chest did something small and warm and unexpected, and I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, before I went to sit at the other end of the table and start my own morning. After that, I started noticing the other things. She began leaving the living room lamp on when I worked late, so that I wouldn't come back to a dark apartment. She quietly rearranged the bathroom cabinet to give me a second shelf without mentioning it or waiting to be thanked. On a Sunday in late November, she found me at the kitchen table surrounded by papers from my old lease, a billing dispute I was trying to untangle that had been eating my evenings for a week, and she sat across from me without being invited and looked at the papers with the expression she used when she was reviewing a site plan. "Show me," she said. "It's fine, I know you can. Show me anyway." She resolved it in 20 minutes. She knew exactly which number to call, what language to use, what tone to adopt. The particular combination of certainty and specificity that makes bureaucratic systems do what you want. I watched her on the phone and thought about all the years I had spent being slightly afraid of that voice, that register, that absolute assurance. And I realized I was watching it do something for me. Not at me. For me. Afterward, she poured a glass of wine and went to stand at the window and look at the lake, which was dark and serious the way November lakes always are. And I stayed at the table and we were quiet together, and it was, I don't have a better word for it, comfortable. Not the silence of two strangers enduring proximity, something that had already begun to be something else. Talvez você que está ouvindo isso agora, maybe you who are listening to this right now, have known that particular shift. The moment when someone goes from being a person in your life to being a person who matters in your life. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it happens in the most ordinary moments. A mug of tea, a lamp left on, someone sitting across a table from you and saying, "Show me. I'll help." Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a person like that appear in your life when you least expected it? Someone who changed the quality of your ordinary days without either of you quite deciding it was happening? I'd love to know. I read every comment. The night that cracked something open between us happened in November, a Friday. Maya came home nearly 3 hours late, which was unusual enough that I had already eaten dinner alone, and was reading in the living room when I heard her key in the door. She came in, and she was not broken, not falling apart. Maya Chen did not fall apart, but she was worn in a way I had never seen before, like a garment that's been washed too many times and has started to lose its original shape. Her blazer was still perfect, her hair was still exact, but her face, underneath all of that, was carrying something heavy. She went to the kitchen without speaking. I heard the wine cabinet open. She didn't offer me any, which told me more than any words could have. She had, for a moment, forgotten I was there, which meant she was genuinely undone. Because Maya Chen never forgot anything that was in her space, I gave her 10 minutes. Then I got up and went to the kitchen and made pasta. Simple pasta, garlic, olive oil, a little red pepper, parmesan if you have it. And I did because I'd found, 2 weeks earlier, that she kept a wedge of good parmesan in the cheese drawer and had never once used it. I put a bowl in front of her at the kitchen island and set a fork beside it and went back to stirring my own. She looked at the bowl, then at me. "You didn't have to. I was hungry," I said. "I made extra." We ate in silence for a while. Then, in a voice that was quieter than her usual register, flatter, stripped of its professional architecture, she told me, there had been a commission, a cultural center on the south side, a project she had been developing for 2 years. Community space, exhibition rooms, a roof garden, a program for local schools. The kind of project that doesn't just add a building to a neighborhood, the kind that changes the texture of a neighborhood, that gives people a sense that the city is paying attention to them. She had won the commission 18 months earlier. She had been in design development for over a year. That afternoon, the new city council member representing the district had informed the client that he would be directing the commission to a different firm, a firm that had contributed to his campaign. Not an architectural decision. Not a question of vision or merit or what would actually serve the community. Politics, plain and simple, with the community's needs as incidental. "I had designed a courtyard," she said, her eyes on the bowl she was no longer eating from. Open to the street on 2 sides, a community garden along the east wall. Raised beds, accessible, with a program for the local elementary school to maintain them. The kind of space that changes how people feel about the block, how they feel about being there. A pause. "It's gone. I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it the way you only mean things when you have understood exactly what something cost someone, when you can feel the precise shape of the loss. She looked at me then, really looked, the way she rarely did, the way that feels different from being observed. And something in her expression shifted in a way I couldn't name yet, but recognized as significant. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Do what?" "Stay intact. Your husband left. You nearly lost your apartment. You came to live in a stranger's home, and you reorganized my linen closet, and you made pasta, and you—" She stopped. A sound that was not quite a laugh, but was almost one. "You are remarkably undamaged for someone who has had a genuinely terrible autumn." I thought about this honestly before answering. I owed her honesty. She had earned it somehow, without either of us noticing the earning. "I don't think I'm undamaged," I said. "I think I just haven't slowed down long enough to fully feel the damage yet. And by the time I might have, you gave me somewhere to be. Somewhere that required me to function." A breath. That helps more than I can explain. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, almost to herself, "I didn't expect you to be this kind of person." "What kind?" "The kind that doesn't disappear when things get heavy." I sat with that. I let it be true without deflecting it. And the silence that came after it was the warmest silence I'd ever sat in with another person. There is a moment, if you are lucky and also paying attention, when you understand something about yourself that you have been keeping just at the edge of knowing. Not a revelation in the dramatic sense, not a door blowing open, but a quiet shift, like a piece of furniture that you realize has always been in the wrong place, and now, moved just a few inches, suddenly makes the whole room make sense. Mine happened on a Sunday morning in December. I need to say something first, because I think it's important. I had never, consciously, with language, with any kind of clarity, thought about loving a woman before Maya. I had not grown up in an environment where that was presented as an available option, or a real thing, or even a thing that applied to people I knew. I had had boyfriends. I had had Derek. And in between I had gone on dates with men who were fine, who were decent, and I had always assumed that the missing piece, that sense of being truly known, truly met, truly in the presence of someone who saw you, was just someone I hadn't found yet. A particular him, out there somewhere, more compatible than the others. I had not understood that the missing piece might have an entirely different shape than I'd been looking for. Living with Maya was rearranging things inside me that I hadn't known were movable. It wasn't dramatic. That's what I want you to understand, because I think we're often taught that self-discovery looks like a lightning strike, like a single catalytic moment. But the truth, at least for me, was quieter. It was accumulation. It was the way she moved through her apartment with an authority I found, to my own bewilderment, beautiful. The way she smelled, something clean and resinous, cedar and cold air. The way her rare, genuine laughs were so different from her professional composure that they felt like glimpses of a room that was usually locked. The way she would occasionally turn toward me in the middle of a silence with something in her eyes that I didn't have a word for yet, and had been trying not to look at directly. That Sunday morning, we were at the kitchen table. She was reviewing drawings for a residential project, her glasses slightly askew in the way they got when she was concentrating hard enough to forget she was wearing them. I was reading, or trying to. The light coming through the east-facing windows was pale and specific, the kind of winter light that makes everything look considered. I looked up from my book, and I watched her for a moment, just watching, just the ordinary act of being in the same room as another person. And then she looked up and caught me, and I didn't look away fast enough, and a beat passed between us that was not ordinary at all. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "Your glasses." She straightened them. She looked back at her drawings. I looked back at my book, and the words on the page meant absolutely nothing to me, because all I could think, all I could hold, suddenly and irrevocably, was, oh, just that small word, just that quiet, seismic shift. Maybe you who are listening to this right now have had that moment, that particular kind of understanding that arrives not as a shout, but as a whisper that is somehow louder than anything. The moment when something that has been at the edge of your knowing steps forward into the light, and you can no longer pretend you haven't seen it. Whatever that moment was for you, whatever it changed, whatever it meant, I want you to know that you don't have to have language for it immediately. You don't have to know what to call it right away. You just have to be willing to let it be real. If this story is speaking to you, share it with someone who might need it tonight. And if you're new here, subscribe. We tell stories here that don't get told enough. And I am so glad you're here. I started building small distances after that Sunday morning, not dramatically. I was still living in her apartment, still working 12 feet from her in her firm. But I started taking breakfast in my room, staying later at the office, giving myself the story that what I was feeling was gratitude complicated by loneliness, proximity plus vulnerability equals confusion, nothing more. It was a story I told myself for about 6 weeks, and I want to be honest, I knew, even as I was telling it, that it wasn't true. But some truths need a little time before you're willing to be responsible for them. Maya noticed. She noticed everything. It was one of the most relentless things about her, that total environmental attention that made her a brilliant architect and a very difficult person to hide from. She didn't say anything for a week and a half. Then one evening she appeared in my doorway. She had never come to my doorway before, in 4 months of living together, and stood there with her arms crossed. Not angry, not performing patience. Just waiting with the quality of someone who has decided something is going to happen and is simply allowing it the dignity of arriving in its own time. "Did I do something?" she asked. "No." "Then what is it?" "I just need some space," I said, which was both true and completely insufficient as an explanation. "This is a 2,300 square foot apartment, Lily. Space is not something we're short of." I almost smiled despite everything. That was so entirely Maya, the precision of it, the refusal to accept imprecision even in emotional conversation. It's not that kind of space, I said. What kind is it? I looked at her in the doorway, this woman who had made me tea every morning for months without once calling it a kindness, who had resolved my billing dispute and left my lamp on and reorganized the bathroom cabinet without asking for thanks, who was standing here now, asking me what was wrong in the only way she knew how, which was directly and without the softening gestures that most people use. And I thought, I cannot tell her this. This will ruin everything. She will ask me to leave. She will be horrified. She will. I'm confused about something, I said carefully. About what? About what I feel. A breath. About feelings I've been having lately that I don't have a map for yet. She looked at me for a very long time. Her expression was unreadable in the way it sometimes was when she was doing something complex under the surface. Then she said, "Do you think you're the only one who's confused?" And she turned and walked back down the hallway, and I sat with those words for the rest of the night, turning them, examining them from every angle, afraid to decide what they meant, but more afraid to keep pretending I didn't know. Christmas Eve in Chicago is its own specific kind of beautiful. The city overdoes it in the way that only Midwestern cities fully commit to. The lights on the Magnificent Mile, the ice on the river, the sense that somewhere nearby there is always someone cooking something that smells like cardamom and butter. Maya and I had both attended the firm's holiday party, separately, professionally, with the careful distance we had been maintaining for weeks. The building elevator was broken when we got home. We walked up 23 floors in the stairwell, which in heels and a holiday dress takes approximately as long as it takes to reconsider several major life decisions. By the time we reached the landing outside our door, we were both slightly out of breath, and the city glittered far below through the narrow stairwell window, and Maya had her keys in her hand and she stopped. She didn't reach for the door. She turned and looked at me, and it was not the professional look, not the assessment, not the architectural appraisal. It was something I had only seen from her in fragments before, in the evening over pasta, in the Sunday morning kitchen, and that night, it was all there at once, unchecked, undisguised. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said, "about being confused. Maya." Let me finish. A breath. And from Maya Chen, a breath like that cost something real. I could see it costing her. I was married for 11 years. Since that marriage ended, I have not let anyone close to me, deliberately. I chose it deliberately because I understood the cost of the alternative, and I decided the cost was too high. She paused, pressed her lips together. "You came into my apartment with 2 cardboard boxes and someone else's heartbreak, and within 3 weeks you had reorganized my linen closet and made friends with my housekeeper and learned how I take my coffee, and you..." Another pause, longer. "You made this apartment feel like a place someone lives in, not just a place where I sleep and work and exist. Someone lives in it now. I notice it every day. I couldn't speak. Something in my throat was doing something that had no name. I don't know what this is," she said quietly. "I'm 42 years old, and I have built things that will outlast me, and I have run a successful firm for 15 years, and I do not..." A small, hard exhale. "I do not know what this is. That should probably embarrass me." "It doesn't," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "It doesn't embarrass me at all." "Lily?" "Just my name," said without anything professional in it. "Just my name," which I had heard her say in the office dozens of times, and never like this. Never the way you say someone's name when it means something specific to you. "Are you confused about me, or about yourself?" The city below us, 23 floors, Christmas Eve. A stairwell that smelled like cold concrete, and, faintly, the cedar thing that was always on her perfume or her soap or just her. I had never been able to determine which. "I was confused about myself," I said. "For a while, I was very confused about myself, but I'm not anymore. And I was never confused about you, about what I feel when I'm around you. That part has been clear for a long time. I just didn't have language for it yet, and I was afraid of what the language would mean." She looked at me for a long moment, then she reached out, slowly, the careful way you reach toward something precious that you're not sure you have the right to touch yet, and placed her hand against my cheek. Her palm was warm. Her eyes, up close and in this particular light, were not the controlled professional surface I had read from across office distance for 3 years. They were complicated, tired in the way that long-held discipline makes a person tired. And underneath the tiredness, something that looked, tentatively and carefully, like hope. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I should tell you that up front. I know," I said. "I don't either. I should tell you that too." She looked at me for another moment, and then she laughed. The real one, the rare one, the sudden, unguarded version that arrived so seldom it always felt like a gift. And it filled the stairwell and bounced off the concrete walls, and the city sparkled far below. And I felt it, as I always did, in the center of my chest, like something warm and certain. "We're a pair," she said. "We are," I agreed. She unlocked the door. "I want to tell you what happened after, because this is not a story that ends at a door. Life doesn't work that way, and I think you deserve the truth of what came next, not the cleaned-up version. There were weeks of figuring out what we were and what we were becoming. Conversations that felt enormous and fragile at the same time. Questions without templates. I called my sister in Tennessee on a Sunday afternoon in January and told her things I had never said out loud, in any direction, to any person. And I sat with the silence on the other end of the line and waited, my heart doing something complicated and fast. And then my sister said, "Lily, are you happy? Are you genuinely happy?" And I said, "I think so. I think I'm starting to be." And she said, "Then that's what matters. That's actually all that matters." I cried after I hung up, for a long time. Not out of sadness, out of the particular relief of being seen by someone who has known you your whole life, and choosing, in that seeing, to love you anyway. Maya and I were careful at work. Rigorously, almost comically professional in the office, in that way that requires a kind of constant low-level effort that is both exhausting and also, in retrospect, a little funny. We rode different elevators to lunch. We used each other's last names in meetings. Our colleagues, who were sharp and architecturally trained to notice detail, began to notice something different about both of us, but couldn't quite name what it was, which satisfied me in a way I hadn't expected. At home, we were simply ourselves, which turned out to be something neither of us had allowed in a long time. Maya showed me drawings she had never shown anyone. Early sketches, rough and unpolished, the architecture before the architecture, the thinking underneath the finished thing. She would spread them on the kitchen table and say, simply, "Tell me what you see." Not, "Is this good or does this work?" Just, "What do you see?" And I would look carefully, because she deserved careful looking. And I would tell her. And she would listen in the way she listened when something mattered to her, completely. In February, she submitted a new proposal. A different commission, smaller, on the west side, a community arts space for a neighborhood that had been asking the city for investment for a decade. She didn't tell me she was submitting it. She told me after it was done, but I saw the drawings, and I saw the courtyard, east-facing, open to the street on two sides, raised garden beds along the eastern wall with a plaque indicating the local elementary school partnership program. "Is that?" I started. "It needed somewhere to exist," she said, simply, as if it were a structural fact, which I suppose it was. I looked at her across the kitchen table, and I thought about walls and doors and the architecture of people, how much they resemble buildings in the ways that matter. Load-bearing structures, hidden rooms, windows that let the light in from specific angles. I thought about the 21-year-old who had come here with the wrong kind of hope and the right kind of stubbornness. I thought about the woman I was becoming, who was different in ways I could feel but not yet fully name, which is fine. You don't need to be able to name something to know it's real. Spring arrived the way Chicago springs always do, with a kind of aggressive insistence, as though the city is making up for the winter all at once, the lake going from pewter to blue in what feels like a single morning, the trees on Lakeshore Drive suddenly loud with green. One evening in April, I was in my room. The east-facing room I still technically occupied, though by then the question of which bedroom belonged to whom had become somewhat theoretical. When Maya came in and sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at me with the expression she had when she had decided something and was choosing the right moment to say it. "You don't have to stay in this room, you know," she said. I looked at her. "Are you evicting me? I'm offering you better accommodations." A pause. The small private smile, the one I had learned to distinguish from all her other expressions, the one that was only ever for moments like this. Just for a while, I laughed. She laughed. Outside the window, the lake was doing its spring thing, insisting on itself with complete conviction, and somewhere far below us, the city was full of people living their ordinary, extraordinary lives, and I thought about the girl who had come here with 2 suitcases and a kind of hope that embarrasses you later, and I thought, she wasn't wrong, that girl. She just hadn't known yet that the life she was hoping for was a different shape than she'd been taught to expect. That it would arrive in a different form, carried by a different kind of love, than anything she had been given a map for. She wasn't wrong. She was just at the beginning, and beginnings, I know now, are supposed to feel like that, like not knowing, like being slightly lost, like holding something that doesn't have a name yet and trusting that the name will come. I came to Chicago thinking I needed to find my life. I didn't understand yet that what I was doing was finding myself. That those 2 things for a long time are not the same journey. But if you stay with yourself long enough, patient enough, honest enough, they eventually arrive at the same place. Lily Harris, Chicago. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. That means something real to me. I know your time is precious, and spending it here, with Lily and Maya, in Chicago in the winter and then the spring, that is a gift. If something in this story touched you, if there was a moment that felt like yours, a line that made you stop and sit with it, tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you've ever had a cup of tea waiting for you on a counter that you didn't ask for, and what that felt like. Tell me if you've ever been the person who needed a room to stay in, or the person who had a room to offer. These stories connect us. That's what they're for. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. This channel is built for stories like this one. Stories about women finding themselves in unexpected places. About love that arrives in unfamiliar shapes. About the quiet courage it takes to stop living inside the wrong version of your own life and start building the real one. There is always more coming. I'll see you in the next story.